47, two of the world's most iconic firearms. One is the most prolific rifle in history and a symbol of revolution around the world. The other represents American precision and lethality. Throughout the latter half of the 20th century, both weapons came face to face on battlefields from Asia to the Middle East. But which is the superior weapon? Hello and welcome to another episode of the Infographics Show. Today we're taking a look at the M16 versus the AK-47. During World War II, German research showed that most firefights occur within 400 meters, yet the rifle used by armies around the world were all engineered for conflicts far outside of this range, and ultimately overpowered for the reality of war. The only other option at the time was the submachine gun, whose high rate of fire was devastating in close quarters, but its low range and accuracy made it impossible to use at ranges past 50 meters. The Germans realized they needed a new weapon, and thus the assault rifle was born. The Germans would go on the long-range accuracy of a standard rifle and create the Sturmgewehr 44. With a lower rate of fire than a traditional submachine gun, but far greater range and accuracy, the Sturmgewehr gave German soldiers an unparalleled advantage on the battlefields of World War II. Having learned from very painful lessons inflicted on them by the Germans, the Soviets would go on to immediately recognize the need for an assault rifle of their own. After the war, opting for a 7.62mm cartridge, Soviet gunsmiths developed the vaunted AK-47, which entered production in the early 1950s. The weapon featured both semi-automatic and fully automatic firing modes, letting Soviet soldiers deliver accurate long-range fire or overwhelming suppressing fire when needed. Built upon the Soviet ideology of massing large numbers of cheaply made weapons, AK-47s were cheap to mass produce, but because of its stamped steel design, it's not easy to manufacture without specialized equipment, a potential vulnerability in the case of war against the US, as the Soviets would have faced the threat of having the bulk of their specialized manufacturing infrastructure targeted and potentially destroyed. The AK-47 was also much more difficult to repair on the battlefield, featuring parts that were riveted together and would require special tools to grind off an old rivet and set a new one. It also featured many smaller, less durable springs and other parts that required replacing after every few thousand rounds. And after disassembly, beyond the field stripping stage, parts take time to regain their fit, leaving them vulnerable to shaking loose and falling out when firing the weapon. All these deficiencies, however, were offset by the relatively cheap price, costing just a fraction of the M16, and thus letting them be mass-produced. Working off a battlefield cannibalization ideology, troops were not expected to receive resupply on the battlefield, and were instead taught to simply cannibalize other AK-47s to repair their own. This was largely in line with most of Soviet military doctrine, whose poor focus on logistics continues to plague even the modern Russian army today. Its cheap cost and ease of manufacturing has led the AK-47 to become the most prolific weapon ever made, and out of an estimated 500 million firearms around the world, 75 million are AK-47s. By comparison to their Soviet counterparts, American military planners were much slower to adopt the idea of an assault rifle for infantry. Having failed to learn the lessons of World War II, American GIs would go on to fight in the jungles of Vietnam and Korea, where the AK-47 would be used to devastating effect against inferior equipped American infantry. Equipped with the M14, a rifle with a 20-round magazine and fully automatic fire capacity, American soldiers found that they could not compete with the superior AK-47. Completely uncontrollable at full auto fire, and without the ability to carry enough ammunition to maintain fire superiority over the AK-47, the M14 was a significantly inferior weapon and costing American lives. The U.S. Army quickly drew up requirements for a new battlefield rifle and reconsidered a 1957 request by General Willard G. Wyman to develop a 5.56mm select fire rifle weighing no more than 6 pounds when loaded with a 20-round magazine. The rifle had to be able to pierce a standard U.S. helmet at a range of 500 yards and retain a velocity in excess of the speed of sound. This request resulted in the development of the Armalite AR-15 rifle, which, while overwhelmingly superior to the M14, the Army still opposed its adoption. It wouldn't be until 1963 that Secretary of Defense